Hello, my name's Tuppence. I've recently been doing some mould making. I created a lemon pot which I cut on my laser and then I used silicone to mould it. I'll leave a link to that video up there. Whilst I was cutting that pot, I used up the free space on my wood to cut things like this, small things. So this is a little mermaid tail, and I think it's too big to be an earring. I would use this as a keyring, but it could be a pendant. And I cut a couple of these little hearts as well, just to use up as much as I could of my wood. So I want to see if I can actually make a mould out of them, and I'm going to be using some of this. This is silicone putty, and according to the labelling on the box, it is easy to use and fast curing. So if I just turn this round, it says that you've got to mix it together and to apply it to your moulded object within 3 minutes. And then you need to just wait 10 to 20 minutes before it is ready to demold and use. It doesn't say anything about waiting for 24 hours before you can use it. To mix it up, I'm going to need to measure equal amounts of part A and part B being the blue one. It's measured by weight, and you need to mix it together until you just have one colour. A little further down, it says that you do have an adjustment of plus or minus 5 grams. So you can go a little bit over or under the measurements for each part. And that is quite a large leeway. So I'm going to put my scales on. I want to make sure I've got it on grams. And you can get scales that are more accurate than this and measure in milligrams, but this should be fine because, as I say, you've got quite a large leeway. So I'll just get these out of the box. You get 2 pots, and there are 7 ounces in each pot, which means you get 14 ounces total. So let me just grab everything I'm going to need, and I can see if I can mould these pieces. I want to protect my mat because I don't know how it's going to react with that. So I'm going to work on this sheet of release paper from the back of some vinyl. I've got the mermaid tail, which I've covered in chrome marker, so that is sealed, but these are not even varnished, it's raw wood. So we'll see just how it reacts. The packaging states that this is toxic free, and it does not mention wearing gloves anywhere. The pictures that were on the Amazon website do not show people wearing gloves, so I am going to trust it and I'm not going to wear gloves. I have no idea how much I'm going to need just to cover this little piece, but I'm just going to grab a spatula and hook a lump out, and then I can weigh it and see roughly what you get for the weight. Alright, that is 2 grams. So I'm guessing I want at least double that. You've got to remember, when you combine them, you're also going to end up with double. So I need another 4 grams of the blue. Pop that on. Okay, it's really quickly switched to 8, but I'm just going to add a tiny blob because we're probably, marginal. Alright, so let me mix these 2 together. I'm going to keep everything in real time at the moment so you can see just how long it takes. So I'm kind of squeezing it, folding it, and massaging it together between my 2 hands. It's very squidgy, really soft, and it feels a little bit oily at the moment. So I'm just going to keep stretching that and folding it and pushing it together. That's really quickly come together. I can't really see much distinction in colour. Okay, whoops. So let me just roll this now into a sausage. Just get that all incorporated. And I think we're pretty much ready to go, actually. Yeah, not bad. The only instructions about how to do this were on the outside of the box. It didn't come with any kind of instruction booklet or anything like that. But it suggests that you cover it with a really thin layer and press that into all of the details first. So I'm going to squish this in and try and fill up these holes. I think I'm probably pushing the boundaries for the detail a little bit on this, but you never know until you try. So I'm just going to make sure I've really squished that clay down into the holes. It's still pretty soft at the moment. I just want to make sure that I press that in. The only thing I'm concerned about is if I get any air bubbles, which I can't see, but yeah, we never know. All right, so I definitely don't have enough. I've got a layer over the top, but I do need a little bit around the edge and I need a certain depth as well. So I'm going to need to mix up a little bit more. Now this is going to be curing as I mix this up, so be able to see whether you can join two bits of clay together. So I've sped this up because you've already seen me do this process. I'm just going to weigh out a little bit more, mix it up, and then I can add it on top. Well, that process took me about a minute, and now I'm just going to join this on top and we'll see how well it can blend together and stick, and whether that makes any difference to the mould afterwards. So I'm just going to smooth that out, make sure everything is covered. Now that I've got this buried, it's really hard to see where the piece is and do I have enough all the way around the outside. So that is a little bit of a downside. I want to use this mould with resin, so I need the back to be flat, otherwise anything I pour will not be level. So let me just find something that I can use to flatten the back of this. All right, this is a stamping block. So I'm just going to push that down and squish it. Now I figure I'm probably going to have to leave this in place until that has set. Otherwise, if I try and pick this up, that's just going to deform the shape that I've made. So I'm going to leave this and I'll be back once that's cured. It should only take about 10 minutes. It's been just over 10 minutes, maybe nearer 12. So I'm just going to test that. And that feels set. So let me try and take this off. Oh, that came off really easy. So yeah, that does feel set. Now, can I get it off of this? Let me try and take that off. Well, that is a little bit more stuck than I was hoping for. Maybe not everything has completely set just yet. I don't know. Yeah, I might have needed to leave that a little bit longer. But this is what I meant. I do have an air bubble there, so that hasn't gone all the way up along the edge of the mould. But it has filled in all the details far better than I thought it would. So I'm pretty surprised about that. There are a few bits around the edges that look a little bit ragged, and if you're going to use this with resin, that is going to make a difference. And I do need to fix that hole, so I wonder if I can just fill that in. The two layers that I added do seem to have bonded together, but this is now completely set, so I don't know how it's going to react if I add some more putty onto that. But I definitely need to do something because that is going to make a difference. And I've also got this area up here. Yeah, that's just not going to work. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and mix up a bit more. Oh, and I've also labelled my lids with their blue and the white, B&W. The lids are both the same colour, and because this sets when you mix the two parts together, if I was to accidentally screw the wrong lid on, I could seal these shut. So just a point to make. All right, let me go ahead and mix up a little bit more putty and I'll see if I can fill these in. Okay, I've just taken a very tiny blob off of my piece. I'm going to stuff that in the hole. Just use this spatula to push that down and fill that up. It is really soft, so actually I can spread it around like butter at the moment, which is great. But I do want to be pretty quick because I want to be able to use the rest of this putty on the hearts. All right, that doesn't look too bad. So the rest of this I can use to fill up that gap at the top and extend the mould out a little bit. Then I took the rest of the clay and I filled up the hearts in exactly the same way as before, stuffing it in to fill up the details first. These are made of 3mm basswood, but the frame of the heart itself is only 1mm wide, so it is extremely fragile. And the clay at this point was starting to get a little bit more firm. I did still manage to get it into the heart, but I think I actually broke a piece off on this one. So we'll see a little bit later. Again, I'm going to squash the backs flat so that I will be able to fill these and keep them level. I've got a gap there which I'm going to have to join afterwards, but this is setting up really quickly now. And that is a downside. I mean, it's a plus because you get your moulds really quickly, but it doesn't give you a lot of time to actually mould them around your objects. I've mixed up a little bit more clay and I want to try something else with this. So I've just taken a tiny bit off. I'm going to roll that into a sausage. I want it to be a bit thin at one end. And I'm going to stick this into my mould and I want to see if I can use this as an inlay. Will it stay stuck to the mould? Will it release from the mould? I'm using one of my old moulds here, so I don't really mind if it doesn't work with this. So I've kind of just made a coil, and I'm going to leave that to set. I do want that to stick to the bottom and get a little bit thinner along that edge. This is really soft at the moment, so we'll see how that goes. I'm just going to leave that off to the side. And with the rest of this clay, I'm going to see if I can fill that gap in between the two hearts. So let me remove the stamp block. So this is now already completely set. I'm just going to squish that on top, try and smooth it out as best I can, and flatten it again. And we'll see how that goes. It's not a pretty mould, but it's more important that it actually works. These are all completely set now, so I'm going to try and demould this. And this is really going to be a test because this is wood. It's not sealed apart from the front face. And that is going to prove a problem, especially with all these tiny gaps. So I didn't mention before that this is actually a pretty firm setting silicone. They're graded by levels of hardness. So the liquid silicone I use is 20A, and that's reasonably medium firm. And this is 40A, so this is really quite firm indeed. So I'm just going to see if I can try and poke the holes out, but it's not squidgy at all, and I've just broken that wood, kind of to be expected, so I'm not going to be able to use this for anything else. So let me just see if I can try and get this out and salvage something. It isn't sticking to the wood, it is still releasing, it's just that it's so tight in those holes and it's so firm it's just not coming out. So I'm going to have to break this to pieces, and I've torn the silicone itself. Now, is that because it's just not strong enough? I don't know. It could also be because I've actually joined pieces of silicone together and they didn't bond correctly. I'm just going to remove all of these pieces of wood, try and get everything out. It is not an easy demold. That's another piece of silicone broken off. So yeah, I need to clean up all the little bits of wood that are in there, but I'm still going to try and pour this. It's just definitely not what I was looking for. So for this intricate mould, or certainly with wood, that is a fail, but we'll see how it goes. All right, let me have a look at the hearts and we'll see how that did. Now, I know that I broke this one when I was actually trying to mould it, so that didn't work. But as I've said, these are only 1 millimeter wide, so they're extremely fragile. I just want to see if I can get this one out, because the spaces are a little bit wider in between. I was able to use my thumb to push down on the pieces of silicone in between, and I managed to get it out, but not without breaking it to pieces. So I have a couple of moulds, not without some problems, but I can make something out of them. The inlay is also set, and because this is in a transparent mould, I'm going to use some UV resin to test this out. I'm using craft UV resin. I'm going to add some into a cup so that I can add a bit of glitter. And I'm using Dazzling diamonds, which is a combination of white mica and a glitter as well. So I just need to put a little bit in. I don't want to put too much in because this is UV resin. And give it a mix up. I'm going to pour this in layers, so I'm just going to add a little bit into the bottom, and then I can use my micro brush stick to go around the outside, make sure that there are no bubbles, and I'll pop this under a dual-sided lamp for a first cure. Okay, the putty seems to be alright, it has coped with that UV okay, so I'm now going to cover it up with a second layer, and I'll pop that back underneath the lamp. Okay, moment of truth. Can I get this out? And will it have survived? Well, it looks like it's released from the mould and it has come out with the piece. So can I get it out from this? I can just free that edge. That's all right. That's freed itself. It looks like some of the resin has seeped under a little bit. And I think because this is slightly round, it's kind of cupping it. So I do have to try and pull this out. And this could be a problem because, like I say, this is not very elastic, the silicone itself. Whoop, there you go. That is another fail. I'm not going to be able to use this as an inlay if it's only ever going to be a one and done. I used a pokey tool to dig this out and it took a bit of work. It was not easy to get out at all and it kept breaking up. This is just not an elastic enough silicone. So again, that's a thumbs down for me and it's a fail. Now that I've got the spiral channel, I want to fill it with these red glass chips. But if I was to put these in, they'd fall off that side because there's a gap and nothing to hold them in. So I'm going to cut a strip of bezel tape. And I don't need it to be very long. I just want it to bridge that gap. Now I'm going to lay that on the table and I'll run the edge of the piece down and pick up the tape as I go. That should be nice and smooth. So I just need to press that tape in place and make sure that it is fully stuck to the side. And then I'll be ready to go. I want to put these glass pieces in that channel, so I'm going to need to stick them down, but these are no longer see-through and neither is the pendant. So I won't be able to use UV resin to do that. The UV rays just won't penetrate it and it will not cure. So I'm going to have to use some glue instead, and I'm going to use B7000. I'll fill the channel with the glue and then I can add the chips on top, a little bit like glitter. I'll just sprinkle that on, push those down and then leave that to set. It's going to take about 45 minutes and then I can clean off the excess. So I've already moulded another pendant I've made. I didn't show you the whole process because you've seen me do that already, but I want to see how well this has set. So I'll just take that out and that looks like it has set perfectly well. And the reason I'm really happy about that is because that pendant was made with UV resin. Now, if you're using ordinary silicone, you cannot use UV resin as a master. If you make anything out of UV resin, you do need to make sure it's fully coated with an acrylic varnish or an acrylic paint. It just needs to be sealed in so that it doesn't come in contact with the silicone. Otherwise, it will stop it from curing and you'll just have a mess. But this seems to have cured perfectly fine, and that means you can use it to make moulds of simple UV resin pieces. I've mixed up a larger amount of clay. I wanted to see how easy that was, and it was super easy, just as quick as mixing smaller amounts up. And I'm going to use this to mould a piece that is not porous. So I've got a brooch, a dragonfly brooch, it's metal. Just want to make sure I've got this big enough. And this time I'm going to press the brooch down into the clay rather than putting the clay on top of it. Okay, I've got a few marks on there, so I'm just going to see if I can smooth that out a little bit. And then I need to put this on top. Just try and line that up. It's a little bit further over. Let me move it. Well, it looks like you can't move it once you put it down because it's stuck. So I'll just press that in place. The wings are a little bit curved, so I do want to make sure that I press them in deep enough to get all of the edges, or at least to bring the clay up around them. So I'm just trying to make sure that it is all impressed, and that looks pretty good. I'm also trying not to get my fingers around the outsides making marks. Now it's very close to the edge here, so I think the tips of the wings need a little bit more clay around them. So I don't need all of this clay around here, so let me just pull that up and try and mould that around the outside and extend that a little bit. That's better. All right, once I've got this the way I want it to be, I'm going to leave it to cure and I'll be back to when I can take this out and we'll see what impression we get. While I'm waiting for that dragonfly mould to set, I have mixed up a little bit more clay and I've got a couple of texture plates. I've got a nail texture plate and an embossing folder. And I want to see if I can transfer the patterns onto the clay and then use that in a bezel. So I'm just squashing a blob onto that metal texture plate. Uh-oh, this is sticking to my mat. So yeah, maybe not a good idea to leave this laying around on top of your silicone mat. Got most of it off. So this is a paper embossing folder and I'm going to try that as well. So let me think, where do I want it? I think maybe there. And I'm just going to squash the folder flat. Now this one should be two-sided. I should get a design on either side. Okay, I need to leave these to cure. I'll be back when everything is ready and then I can move on. Okay, everything is now cured, so I'm going to get this dragonfly out of the mould and take a look. It came out easy enough, and it looks like I've got a decent impression. I don't see any bubbles. Yeah, that looks pretty good. It's also very flat on the bottom, which is great. All right, let's check this. Can I get this off? Oh yeah, that came off like a dream. Yes, I can see the pattern on there. I don't know if you can see it. It really is very faint, but it has picked up the pattern. The question is, will it transfer it onto any kind of resin? Don't know, so we'll try that. Let's have a look at the embossing folder. And again, that came out really nicely. I do have a few bubbles around the edges. So yeah, a bubble there around the outside. But that is pretty usable, so I can choose whether to use it on either side. Okay, I think it's about time I test these. So I'm going to get some bezels for those, and I'll mix up some epoxy resin to test on these. Before I add resin to this, I want to see if mica powders will stick to it. So I'm going to use some of this laser powder because I would like a holographic shiny mermaid tail. So I can just about get the brush in there. So let me coat all of this. Well, it looks like I do have some mica in there, but it isn't sticking amazingly well. Can you see these bits here? So yeah, they're not holding on to that mica. So we'll see what it looks like once I've got the resin poured. Right, let me just put the lid on that so it doesn't fly away. I want to add a little bit more glitter, so I'm using Meyspring Dazzling Diamonds, and I've mixed up some Apex One Coat Fast Set resin. Now this is a little bit thicker, which could cause me an issue because it's not going to be as easy to get into these very thin areas of the mould. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that glitter in there because I do want a super sparkly mermaid tail. All right, let me get that mixed in. And then I can try and pour this into the mould. And as I've got that gap there, I might as well make use of it. I'm going to pour my resin in there, and then I'll use the micro brush stick to drag it through all of those narrow channels and try and get this mould filled up. I think that's almost done. So it definitely would have been easier with a thinner resin, but hopefully this will be okay and I don't have any bubbles in it. I'm going to add a little bit of clear resin into the bottom of this piece, and then I can add colour onto that once this layer is set. So I'm just going to spread that out with my micro brush stick and make sure that is evenly coated. So there are a few bubbles that are wanting to cling along the bottom. I added a little bit of gold mica to the resin that I mixed up for the mermaid tail, and I'm just going to use my spatula to try and scrape this into the channels of the heart, kind of spreading it like bread and butter, and I'm pushing it down into the channels. And lastly, I want to pour the dragonfly, so I'm just going to add a little bit more resin to that and some more of the gold mica powder. I'll get that mixed up, and then I can add the resin. So it's already starting to thicken up, but I can pour this in really easy because the channels are nice and open. Okay. It should level itself out, but I'm just going to take a micro brush stick, chase out any kind of bubbles, and I'll leave this to set for a couple of hours. And while I'm waiting for that resin to cure, I'm going to try these texture plates and some bezels. I've got the gold mica powder. I'm just going to apply that to the silicone with a brush. So this one was the texture plate, the nail art texture plate. As I'm brushing on the mica, I can see the pattern starting to appear, so it did definitely pick up the texture. Yeah, the pattern is quite detailed. So that really wasn't very deep at all, that texture plate, and it appears to have got all of the detail, which is fantastic. So I'll just brush that mica all the way over, and then I can see whether I'll be able to lift this off with the bezel. And I'm going to be using some UV resin to do that. So I'm just going to place that down, and I'm going to hold that in place. I'm just pushing it against the mould, and then I can apply a blob of resin in the middle, a little bit more than that. And then I want to spread that out so that it forms a thin layer on the bottom that touches the frame all the way around. And I'm going to use a UV torch to cure this. That way I can keep hold of it until everything is set. It's easier to do than trying to put this underneath a lamp. Okay, I used the torch for about a minute, so this should be cured enough for me to remove. So I'm just going to flex the silicone, and that pops off. And it came off pretty easily. It's taken some of the mica. Now, it hasn't taken the mica all the way up around the edges of the frame. You can see there's some clear resin there. So I don't know if that's because this is not completely flat. It's a little thicker on one side than it is on the other, so it's a little bit like a wedge shape, but that shouldn't make any difference for that. I'm adding a second layer of UV resin to make sure that this is thick enough, and it will help to magnify that pattern. I'm going to pop this underneath my lamp and cure it properly. I'm going to repeat the process and add some gold mica to the texture plate I made with the embossing folder. Because this is a little bit deeper, I'm going to remove some of the surface mica, and then I can add a different colour. That gold should remain sitting in the deep embossing. I'm going to need to let it dry for a little bit before I add another colour of mica powder. This time I'm going to add some blue. And it should only stick where there is bare silicone, not where I have the gold mica powder. So I managed to get rid of the excess by blowing it away. And again, I'm going to place down my bezel and pour in my resin. Only this time, because the etching is so deep, I might end up with some leaks. So I'm going to use some high viscosity resin. Hopefully I will be able to cure this before it has a chance to run out underneath the bezel where the embossing is quite deep. Again, make sure that touches the frame all the way round and cure it with my UV torch. Once it's cured, I'm ready to peel this off, and I can't see too much leakage. I do have a little bit along the side, but that is easily removed. So it doesn't want to just peel off, but I can snip it off with a pair of scissors. It's still pretty soft, and it's also very thin. There we go. Right, that's pretty good. I've got a bubble at the top, but for the most part, that is a really good etching. So I do need to back these so that you can see them powder a little bit better. For the first pendant that I made, I'm going to use a black acrylic paint marker and just colour in the back. And then this should show up a lot better. So you probably can't see that terribly well on camera. I will get some photos once I've finished everything. But I need to leave this to dry before I can add some resin on the back and seal everything in. I think the second pendant will show up much better if I use a lighter background. So I've mixed up some Dazzling diamonds and UV resin, and I'm going to coat the back. Once I've got this covered, I'll pop this underneath my lamp and I'll cure it. I'm also going to add a layer of UV resin on top of the spiral pendant, and I'm using high viscosity resin so that it doesn't run down the edge. Once I've got that covered, I'm going to cure it with my UV torch just to stop that resin from moving, and then I can pop this under my lamp to finish off. The epoxy resin is cured enough so that I can add a little bit of chameleon powder to the back of this pendant. It is just sticky enough for it to stick. I'm using grape, champagne and plum. Okay, these pieces have cured enough that I can try and get them out the mould. They're not completely cured, so they're still a little soft, but they'll continue to harden up once I get them out the mould. So let me see if I can get this out. Now, I had no luck trying to get the wooden piece out. It cracked and broke. And it looks like I've got a huge bubble in this one, so I don't think this is going to work as a piece that I can do anything with. But I'll get it out and have a look at it. Yeah, that's definitely not going to be any good. Half of it's missing, so that's awful. And I noticed something as I was taking this out of the mould. Can you see here? That's falling apart already, and I'm guessing that is where I tried to add two different pieces of the clay together. Maybe it had an air bubble or something. So it definitely did not stick properly. So this mould is no good. That is a failure completely. All right, so let's have a look at this one. I'm really hoping I'll be able to get this one out and that it is intact, because I really want to make this one into something. Okay, so I'm just peeling that back. I think it's helping that it is still a little bit soft, so I'm able to bend it and pull it out of the mould. That does not look too bad. I've got a lot of overspill, so I do need to tidy that up. But again, I can just snip that off with a pair of scissors. Most of it I can just pull off anyway. So yeah, I've just got a little bubble there, but that is not bad at all. So this does need to continue to harden up a little bit, and I'm going to have to drill a hole at the top where I lost the post. but this is pretty good. Yep, I think I can say that this one is a success, apart from the fact that I did lose some of the fins when I was actually making the mould. So let me just check this. Any of these coming away? Yeah, that one is coming away as well. I'm not convinced that this is entirely due to me adding pieces onto it. Even if it is, it's still not perfect, but I did get an impression out of it that is usable. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick look at this one. Now this was the mould that I made from the UV Resin Pendant. So the fact that I can make another mould out of it is brilliant. And it's a pretty good impression too. So I need to back that one. I'll do that later and I'll show you what that looks like in the end. But so far, this is the only one that I can say have had any success with and is actually useful. Being able to cure silicone using a UV resin master. So yeah, perfect for that. Lastly, I have the dragonfly mould to demould, and that is really easy. And the impression is all right. It's not as shiny as I would like it to be, especially considering that this was a shiny metal piece and it has gems in it. But yeah, I also think that the impression is not the greatest. It kind of looks almost soft and rounded. It has taken on the texture, it just doesn't seem to have passed it on very well. Alright, I'm going to only finish the mermaid tail because this video is already getting too long. The rest of them I'll just show you what it looks like in the photographs. Because the back of the mermaid tail is not completely flat, it's a little bit bowed, I don't think that's going to stick very well onto some bezel tape. So I am going to put it on this window film and I'm going to use a little bit of resin to seal that on. As I'm going to be doing UV resin on all of it, that's what I'm going to put down on my mat. And then I can use this stick to spread that out. I want to create a smooth, flat layer that I can dip that mermaid tail in, so it does need to be big enough. And I don't want it to be too lumpy because I don't need it to pick up vast amounts of it. Right, let me just grab some gloves and then I can pick up this mermaid tail and I'm going to dip that in that resin, let it get soaked on the back so it'll get covered. I just pick that back up. Alright, that's easier said than done. Right, there we go. Just check, it looks like it's got quite a lot of resin on there, so now I need to lay that down. I'm going to try and lay it down in one go. Alright, that'll do. I'm not going to move that from where it's landed, but I do need to pop this in my lamp so that it can cure that onto that window film. Okay, that's now stuck onto the window film, which is acting like a bezel tape. So now I'm going to mix up my UV resin. And as I only need small amounts of it, I'm going to mix it up on my mat. So I'm going to add 1 drop of the purple pigment from Let's Resin. This is their epoxy pigment. And I'll just get that mixed in until I've got one solid colour. Then I'm going to use my microbrush stick to add this drop by drop into the tail fins. It's actually taken a lot more resin than I thought it would, and I've just about got enough to fill in the pieces that I want. I'm going to use my UV torch to partially cure this. While I finish filling this up, and once everything is done, I will put it underneath my lamp for a final cure of the whole thing. So I'm going to move on to my next colour, and this is Sapphire Blue. I'm going to use this on the scales at the bottom, and then I'll switch to the paler Sky Blue as I move up, giving an ombre effect. When I get to the top where the scales are filled in, there's just enough texture for me to add the colour anyway. I'm going to cure it as I go so that the drops remain separate and don't all merge into one big blob. The large hole at the top is perfect for a gem, so I'm going to fill that with some clear UV resin and drop in some of this holographic opal chunky glitter. Perfect for a mermaid. I'm going to cure that. Then I'll add another layer on top using up the remaining sky blue resin on the table. Once that's full, I'm going to cure it temporarily with my torch and then I'll pop it underneath my lamp for a full cure. Alright, here's everything that I managed to make, and the upshot is that I got 4 usable pieces. I got a couple of texture plates, so it's great for making those. For mould making, I found it worked best if I was able to push my item into the clay rather than put the clay on top of it. But I still don't think that it is particularly sharp. This, however, worked the best. Now, this was a UV resin pendant, and you cannot use ordinary silicone to mould a UV resin piece. So for that, it is brilliant. Anything intricate and small, that didn't work for me. It could just be that I was using wood, so if you have something a little stronger, maybe, but it's just so fragile and friable, it just falls apart. So I don't know how durable it's going to be in the long term. So these are the pieces that I made. This was from the texture plate, and I used the embossing folder to create this one. You've got a nice deep relief in this. I think it's quite pretty. And this was the nail texture plate. It's extremely fine, but it did pick up those details, so you can see the pattern in there. And I think that's pretty cool as well. The next item, this was the UV pendant. I love this one. It is so pretty. The original pendant was made by pouring some UV resin over the top of some cream, some hand cream in the mould. I've backed this in black and I've coated the front with some UV resin because it is dull when it comes out of this putty mould. But I think that is stunning. Love it. For this pendant, I used the putty to create an inlay, a swirl inlay in the mould. It stuck to the mould really well, but it broke when I tried to remove it from the piece, which means that it isn't reusable and that doesn't make it a practical option. So the dragonfly, I've coloured this with some acrylic paint pens and then I've coated it with some UV resin. It is really pretty, but I don't think the mould captured the same level of detail as the original piece. Everything just seems a little bit soft and rounded. Now this is my favourite piece, so I made this from the wooden mermaid tail that I cut. I absolutely love this. I am surprised that it did manage to capture as much detail as it did, but it wasn't a perfect mould. I did have some failure, so I definitely will be making this again. But next time I'll be using some liquid silicone to make the mould. I've also given this a top coat of UV resin, and that has brought out the sparkle of that laser powder. But the texture of the putty itself means that you're not going to get a shiny mould. So even though this putty sets really quickly and it allows you to make moulds out of UV resin pieces, it isn't something that I'm going to use again. I think I still prefer to use liquid silicone. But I really hope that you found this video helpful, and if you have, can you please consider giving it a like, comment, share if you can, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't. It's free, it will really help my channel, and you'll be able to see what I'm going to make next time. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.